God had a master plan. He formed dust in his own image and made man. He equipped him with the gift of life, which made him stand, and given him dominion over all the land. Placed in his midst the tree of knowledge, man began to do what God desired, naming all the herbs and trees that yielded seeds after his own kind, which served as meat that strengthens man's body and replenishes his mind. Given the authority to what he were to do, man named every animal, even the crippling critters too. He named the fowls in the air that leap bounds without a care, fish in the sea as far as he could see. Man named everything that ever walked, crawled, swam, or stood, and God seen that it was good. Man sent up praises that day that ultimately blew God away, and instantly rain sprayed from the ground where all the animals gathered around as night drew slowly near. Man prepared to rest on that day. Laying out his bed, he began to pray while reflecting back on what God had to say. Commanded him to name every animal at his own will, even took him to the Gardens of Edens, not just to sit still, but to tend to this garden with pruning and till, and eat from his vines that made a succulent meal. God warned man to freely feast at will, but there's one trick in his mess he just couldn't reveal. Its purpose is of good and evil. Don't ask me the reason why. Its fruit is soft and juicy. It make you want to try, causing you to lose your heavenly mind. And eating from this tree on this very day, you will surely die. God knew he gave man a big task to do, so he did what was best to pull him through. Seeing man before he fell off to sleep, he had begun to moan and weep. Noticing all the animals he had groomed so well, they all was capable of producing themselves that walked behind and pulled their tails. He even noticed as he worked in the Gardens of Edens, pruning, tilting, putting up weeds that seemed to have no needs, collecting fruit from his vines that was given to man so he can dine. It's amazing to see. Even the herbs and trees was capable of producing their own seeds. Strange enough as it may seem to be, there was two small insects hanging from a tree, wrapped in shades of green, yellow, and blue that went through a strange metamorphosis, extended his wings, and took off and flew. As man collected his bed of grain, he noticed he had nothing of his own that God gave him to claim, but his own reflection that rippled in the pouring rain. God knew it wouldn't be long before man began to groan for the loneliness and silence for which he yearned for. So he caused man to fall into a deep, deep sleep. That way he wouldn't take a peek of the greatest miracle ever to be performed. As man let out his last yarn, the clouds darkened and the wind spun. Arriving in a twinkle of an eye, God performed surgery on man's belly side. Commanding stars shine bright as they could. That way anything wouldn't be misunderstood. Carefully removing a rib from man's side, God began to shape what will become man's true primate. Make no mistake about it, although she'll be soft as cotton and gentle as a lamb, she'd also be strong as an ox to bear man's children. She was a gift to man. God placed her in his hands, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. Show her the loving kindness I've shown you, and she'll wipe the sweat from your brow. That's what she promised to do. Forsake her for no other, not even your father, your mother. Cleave to your wife and have many pleasant nights. As man awakened from his bed of soft grain, only to notice his wife exposed, bathing in a deep mist of rain. No, not at all were they ashamed, because God established his covenant so they wouldn't bear blame, most of all to see their own gain. As man prepared to wash so he can eat, woman was preparing to taste the feast while reminding herself well not to touch or eat. But the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, prancing and strive, telling exotic lies on what God didn't reveal, grabbing her attention in a very convincing way, whispering in her ear about what God didn't say, about the tree that sat in the midst of the garden and why God didn't want it to be bothered, saying you would die if eaten from this tree, on that very day, but God was afraid that your eyes may become open and you may stray away. But instead, you'll clearly see, know what God knows of good and evil, and on that very day, you'll be as He. It's a shame that woman couldn't maintain having the power of good and evil in her hands, and she gave it one good glance. It was so appealing to her eyes, she couldn't resist from giving it a try. An intriguing man with a piece that sat by her side. As it was written and told, things did unfold, but they didn't expect to see themselves unclothed. They found themselves in discomfort and with great fear, noticing that they were standing at God's Venus, naked, and hearing God's voice closer and near. God had great respect for Adam and Eve, the way He appeared in an autumn breeze, sending on His voice down from heaven above. That's what I read and what I perceived. His voice was heard walking in the cool of the day, calling out to Adam, asking, "Why did you run away?" I can only imagine hearing Adam's reply, "I was afraid you may see my nakedness and that I may die." There's no need for me to go any further. God wasn't passing out hints, sisters and brothers. He clearly stated to Adam and Eve to avoid at all costs the forbidden tree. That tree wasn't placed here for man to consume. He already gave us the earth, star, sun, even the moon. It was placed here to balance off the land so that man can have a chance to expand. I believe I know what that tree is all about. It's like having water in a tub. Try taking the stop out. It's like the weakest part of a vessel is its sail, but without it, you couldn't go anywhere. I truly believe what was God's master plan, to become one with earth through man.